Good morning. Today we celebrate Labor Sunday for the year 2022. And the topic is when food delivery courier meets the workers in the vineyard. The Bible passage is Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. Today is May the 1st, Labor Day. The platform economy is deeply integrated into the lives of Hong Kong people, especially young people, as we visit different product platforms for various services, including shopping, transportation, for example, Uber or taxi apps, and food delivery. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the food delivery industry developed fast because food orders soared rapidly. Under the government's strict measures, Hong Kong people are restricted from dining in restaurants, so the demand for food delivery increases tremendously. At the same time, labor supply goes up too, due to the emergence of a huge unemployed population caused by stoppage or recession of individual industries. The food delivery industry has recruited numerous people because the industry demands low personal qualifications. Among the workers in the industry, a substantial portion are ethnic minority groups. The Pakistani group is the largest one, and the Indian group comes second. How free are the workers under self-employment? There is a general perception that food delivery work is free and flexible, so couriers can manage their own time. Such freedom, however, emerges from a self-employment model. In the self-employment model, couriers assume all kinds of risks without labor protection and occupational safety protection. The only protection is an accident insurance which can cover a life with around 300,000 Hong Kong dollars only. The most common risk is transport accidents of the cyclists or motorcyclists during their hasty food delivery rides. In the first half of 2021, in 196 accidents, platform couriers were involved. 24 of the accidents were serious cases, but all the cases are not classified as occupational injuries. A food delivery courier gets infected with COVID-19. The company suspends his or her account immediately, so he or she is not allowed to work and has no income. Even after his or her return to health, the company does not necessarily reactivate his or her account. The courier still cannot work anymore and earn the income. There is a common belief that food delivery workers could work on their own schedules, but the real situation is that if a courier wishes to get desired work time slots or consecutive work time slots for his or her work, he and she must take all the orders assigned to him or her. Otherwise, she or he will be punished, and it's still difficult for him or her to get desired work time slots. Their income thus drops immediately. In the food panda strike in last November, workers complained about the calculation of the distance on delivery. The Hong Kong office stated that the calculation formula had been on the full control of the head office in Germany. The head office, according to its own assessment, adjusts the calculation formula in the algorithm, but it does not take into account the concrete geographical situation in the local areas. The distance corresponds to the service fee a courier can earn, but the algorithm only counts the direct distance on the map. The exact distance in the local area may be vastly different from that by simple map reading. There may be twists and turns of the roads. The rapid growth of the number of couriers due to huge unemployment is bigger than the growth of food orders. Therefore, each courier on average receives fewer orders and earns less accordingly. Platform companies still enjoy the profit due to the rapid growth of food orders, but the workers lose out. The Riders' Rights Concern Group, a working group under the Hong Kong Christian Industrial Committee, has been monitoring the income of the food delivery couriers of Foodpanda. There was a steady drop of the average total peak hour extra service fee of all kinds of Foodpanda couriers in Hong Kong from early July to late November last year. After the Foodpanda strike in mid-November last year, the drop slowed down and kept stable at the lowest level later. There was a short growth from mid to late February this year, but it went down again in March. The reduction of service fees goes along with fewer orders. Couriers suffered double loss. A former Foodpanda worker, that is a courier delivering orders on foot, Aman, shares. When I was online, my busy time was fragmented. It was not uncommon that I had no order for more than an hour. I sat in a park and was waiting with full attention for order alarm. During sitting in the park, I was very confused. I looked like being addressed because I did not pick up any order. But at the same time, I felt I was working because I had to be there and wait for orders. Furthermore, the work time slots assigned to me were fragmented too. In Foodpanda, each time slot for a worker lasted for 1.5 to 3 hours. There was no guarantee that I could pick up consecutive work time slots. It should be more than an hour between the two time slots I could compete for. In between the two time slots, I had no choice but to take a break and wait without pay. In the time gap did not allow me to go home for a rest. I would stay on the street only and do nothing. I wasted time indeed. Although I did not count the work time slots carefully, in the last 2 weeks, fewer 3-hour time slots were assigned to me, and it is more difficult for me to get consecutive work time slots. Wait and wait is a common experience of food delivery couriers. Couriers must pay full attention to their smartphones and cannot do anything, but the waiting time is unpaid, no matter how long it is. Some couriers share that they even earn less than the legal minimum hourly payment sometimes. Walker Aman states, due to lack of a basic hourly wage, if I could not get an order for a long time, my hourly payment would become incredibly low. I could only prolong my working hours in order to earn the amount I found satisfactory. But it not only made me terribly tired, but forced my life to be occupied by the job only. We turn now to the parable of the workers in the vineyard. The suffering of food delivery couriers look like those of casual workers in the time of Jesus. The Roman government imposed heavy taxes on its subjects. Many Jewish peasants were forced to pledge their lands to borrow money to pay tax. Therefore, a huge unemployed population emerged in the Jewish community. Every day, they gathered in the marketplaces to serve as casual workers and waited to be hired. The daily earning was around a denarius, a day's expenses of a common family in the time of Jesus. They had to work every day without any rest day. Otherwise, their families would go hungry. This is the social background of the parable of the workers in the vineyard. In the parable, the landowner of the vineyard went to the marketplace in the early morning. He hired a group of workers and made an agreement payment with them. A denarius a day. It could cover the daily expenses of a worker's family. In today's terms, it is a living wage. The workers, however, who were able to find jobs in the early morning were skilled, young and strong, or had better networking. Biblical scholars maintain that the job recruitment stated in the parable is slightly different from what exactly happened to the job recruitment in the time of Jesus. Landowners would seldom go to the marketplace to hire casual workers directly. They would do so by agents or managers instead. The agents would make up payment agreements with workers and paid them directly. In chapter 28, the manager was ordered to pay wages to the workers. So if a worker had good networking with an agent, he would be hired to work earlier. The redactor of the Gospel of Matthew is criticized for not paying much attention to the details of the parable. He rather cared of how the concluding statement of the parable appealed to the target readers of the Gospel. The last will be first and the first will be last. Biblical scholar R.H. Gundry maintains that the target reading community of the Gospel is a mixed community in which both Jewish and Gentile Christians stayed together. They might live in Antioch, but Christian groups had conflicts with each other. The parable was a response to the internal conflicts of the Christian community. Biblical scholars may overlook the details of the parable. Some scholars think that the parable of the workers in the vineyard is a parable about the kingdom of God. So there is no need to take much care of details of the parable, but rather, more importantly, the core points. For instance, catch the core points. For instance, how many times the landowner went to the marketplace to hire workers is no more than the colorful detail. Such position is probably because the scholars do not see the issue from the perspective of those workers who were waiting to be hired in a marketplace. The parable does not explain why so many unemployed workers were waiting for jobs. It could be public knowledge in the time of Jesus that labor supply was much more than demand. As mentioned above, the workers who were hired in the early morning should be those with high personal qualifications. To the contrary, the workers who were hired later should suffer from lower personal qualifications. They could be old and weak, low-skilled, or less networking. The landowner asked the workers in the marketplace, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" It means that the workers were not lazy. They were waiting there for jobs the whole day. The workers replied to the landowner, "Because nobody has hired us." The workers had been waiting for jobs the whole day. Such depressing waiting could happen to them often because they suffered from lower personal qualifications. They were unlikely to be chosen to work early. They and their families went hungry often, even though they got jobs eventually. They and their families could not afford a day's expenses. They had no choice but keep on waiting in the marketplace for jobs, even until 5 p.m., just an hour before off duty. It was probable that they would earn less than 1/10 of the daily wage finally, but the whole family still relied on such meager earnings for the day's expenses. It is said that the waiting for jobs might repeat itself again on the following day and the days to come. An endless dilemma faced the workers, that they either earned no income or waited for the jobs endlessly. The fact that the landowner kept on going to the marketplace to recruit workers was a good news for them indeed. What happened to the casual workers in the time of Jesus is also happening to the delivery couriers in Hong Kong. Couriers wait for orders. They look like standing there idle, but in fact they are waiting for jobs. Such waiting depresses people. As Walker Aman says, it was not uncommon that I had no order for more than an hour. I sat in the park and was waiting with full attention to order alarm. They are waiting for orders with work preparation, but it is not regarded as work because waiting is unpaid. The controversy of the parable of the workers in the vineyard is that all the workers were rewarded a denarius when they worked in the vineyard. Therefore, the first-come workers grumbled against the landowner. In Greek, the word grumble is a strong and violent protest. The parable hints that it was the landowner's deliberate act to irritate the first-come workers, so they protested against the landowner. If the parable wanted to focus on the generosity of the landowner, the first-come workers should be paid first and then leave. The late-come workers would praise the generous grace of the landowner when they received the same amount as the first-come workers did. This is a deliberate dramatic arrangement in order to echo the concluding statement: the last will be first, and the first will be last. Christians, through the ages, tried to explain the controversial parable. The Church generally takes the parable as an expression of Paul's theology in the Gospel of Matthew, a dichotomy between God's grace and human merits. Martin Luther thinks that this parable is a teaching to uphold God's grace alone and deny human merits. Different Christian traditions, including the Catholic Church, also see the first-come workers as the camp of human merits and the late-come workers the world of grace. The landowner did not make a concrete wage agreement with the latecomers workers. Their working time was not long enough to deserve a denarius, so the final payment was God's grace alone. Today, biblical scholars do not see the parable as a dichotomy between God's grace and human merits. They are not blind either to the economic and labor context of the parable. Although the landowner did not conclude an agreement payment with the late-come workers, he promised to the workers a right reward. I will pay you whatever is right. The late-come workers did receive more than what they deserve, but at least a part of the payment was for their wages, and the rest was the landowner's grace. It is both the workers' merits and the landowner's grace. How do we understand the protest of the first-come workers? Biblical scholars generally take the viewpoint that the reward of the kingdom of God is beyond one's calculation and imagination. It is not assessed as the wages to one's laboring efforts. Biblical scholars maintain that the protest of the first-come workers showed that they were pitiless to the late-come workers, who suffered from lower personal qualifications. It could be Jesus' attack against the Pharisees' ignorance of the sufferings of the poor when he was speaking of this parable. The principle of contract and mutual agreement. The general opinion towards the protest of the first-come workers is negative because the scholars do not see the issue from the labor perspective. The church and biblical scholars generally accept that the reward of the kingdom is not based on the work more, earn more calculation. But the landowner's answer to the first-come workers is exactly a kind of commutative justice. The landowner said to the workers, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage, a denarius?" The landowner paid the workers what he had promised. It was just. In today's terms, the landowner observed the principle of the contract. The principle of contract is mutual agreement, but it could be concluded based on an unequal power relationship. Employers offer payment, but workers have no power to bargain. They can only take it or leave it. Leave it means that workers have no income and their families go hungry. This is the suffering the casual workers faced in the times of Jesus. Why were the first-come workers so serious about their income? It was because workers alone had to assume all the duties of their families. They worked hard in order to feed their families. Workers had pledged their lands, but might still owe debts, or even their children could have been enslaved. Workers alone had to take up all the responsibilities of their own lives and their families. The society had no duty to support them. Workers had to care about every single coin because the society provided no social protection to them. In the time of Jesus, landowners were ones to consolidate the economic culture. A person alone takes all the responsibilities for his or her own life and his or her family. Landowners held resources. They made payment agreement with workers, but workers could take or leave it only. The workers either had no income or took the offer of the landowners. Employers made payment agreement with workers so that workers could pay the daily expenses of their families. Therefore, there was no duty of the society anymore. It could be even regarded as the grace of the employers. Under such economic culture, did the landowners reply to the first-come workers, "I've paid all that I agreed to agree payment on the principle of contract. Why do you protest against me?" But nobody asks if the agreed payment is reasonable. Workers have no control of their future. What they can do is to earn as much money as they can every day. If they can get more income, why do they not fight for it? Workers can earn money today, but it does not guarantee what will happen tomorrow and the days to come. Unless there was social protection to protect the workers and their families, it was also pitiless to blame against the first-come workers who had been harsh to the late-come workers. The whole vulnerable suffered from the no social protection. The principle of contract is not justice, but rather an exploitation of workers. The sufferings of the casual workers sound familiar to food delivery workers today. The Couriers will say, yes, it is exactly what is happening to us now. Platform companies sign contracts with couriers. They are not employment contracts. They are mutual agreements, but the platform companies hold control of all things, and the couriers follow to take orders only. Otherwise, they have no choice but to quit. The principle of contract empowers the platform companies to cut the service fee of couriers at will and suspend or close their accounts. The companies accuse themselves by saying that they do so on the basis of the principle of contract, so they owe no compensation to the couriers. But the question is, who decides the contract terms? The redactor of the Gospel of Matthew was concerned about the division of the target reading community of the Gospel. Although both the Jewish and Gentile Christians were in conflict with each other, all of them were under persecution. Their division fits the division between the first-come and the late-come workers. Such division is also happening to food delivery couriers in Hong Kong. Couriers are divided into two main groups, Chinese and ethnic minority groups. In Hong Kong, ethnic minority groups enjoy less favorable status on employment due to language, education, religion, and culture. Since the food delivery industry demands low personal qualifications, the ethnic minority couriers take food delivery as a long-term job. On the other hand, Chinese couriers joined the industry because they became unemployed during the pandemic. They take food delivery as a short-term or temporary job. Both groups are different on ethnicity, language, culture, and the reason to join the industry. But they have a common goal, that they need to work to feed their families. Both Chinese and ethnic minority groups have their own communities and seldom come together. In the strike of Deliveroo in 2020 and Food Panda in 2021, the whole campaigns were also dominated by the ethnic minority groups. Few Chinese couriers joined the campaigns. The ethnic minority groups did blame the absence of Chinese couriers in the campaigns. Another saying is, however, that Chinese couriers did not join the not take order. Another saying, is, however, that Chinese couriers did join the not take orders campaign in the Food Panda strike. If not, the management of Food Panda would not in a short time come to the negotiation table with the workers. It is usual and understandable that both Chinese and ethnic minority groups stay in their own communities. There has been no racial conflict in Hong Kong so far, but we admit that such division between both Chinese and ethnic minority groups will damage the solidarity among food delivery couriers and the community, the whole society. To conclude, the parable gives us an encounter between the world of the Bible and today's world. It is widely recognized among biblical scholars that the parable sets up a context in which readers can encounter, one, the world of the parable, second, the speaker of the parable and his and her world, third, the redactor of the parable and his and her world, and fourth, the persons and the communities which make interpretation of the parable every generation and everywhere. At the same time, our world also encounters the words of various layers of the parable. By the analysis of the parable, the economic and social world of the parable of the workers in the vineyard is revealed. We can see those casual workers who had lost land and owed debts, but the society imposed upon them all the responsibilities of their own lives and their families. We also see the Pharisees and the social outcasts in the time of Jesus. The division of the target reading community of the Gospel of Matthew is also revealed. From the laborer's perspective, we speak out for the casual workers in the time of Jesus. Moreover, the sufferings of casual workers also reflect the sufferings of food delivery couriers in Hong Kong. Both groups of workers face common suffering, although they are in different time and different spaces. The second point is the labor issues in the parable of the workers in the vineyard. The parable is one of the few parables speaking of laborers and wages. The landowner promised to the workers a right reward. It is also a living wage, which covers the expenses of a worker's family. The right reward is counted based on workers' needs, but not on the interest of employers. It is the exact problem of food delivery couriers today. For profit maximization, platform companies cut the service fees of couriers. But the problems the casual workers in the time of Jesus faced was not just wages, but also heavy tax imposed by the colonial government, economic exploitation, which peasants pleaded their lands and their children were enslaved, the pitiless culture in which workers had to assume all the responsibilities of their own lives and their families. In today's terms, they were not under any social protection. It is the same problem of food delivery workers today. The platform companies maximize their profit by cutting the service fee of couriers. It is definitely not a just reward. It even may not be a living wage either. Self-employment is a way to impose all the responsibilities on couriers. The platform companies are not obliged to provide labor protection and social protection, let alone the mandatory provident fund. Like casual workers in the time of Jesus, food delivery couriers today cannot ensure their families stable and prosperous lives. And the third point, the hope of Jubilee. As mentioned above, the Church generally explains the parable of the workers in the vineyard with traditional dogma. It sees the protest of the first-come workers as resentment of Jews against Christians. We seldom place back the parable into the Jewish context. Jesus was a rabbi and lived in the Jewish context and culture. The social background of the parable was known to the Jews in the time of Jesus. Similar parables have been found in other rabbis' teaching. It is believed that the parable was familiar to the Jewish community in the time of the early church. Biblical scholar Karen Lebatz maintains that the social background of the parable is known to the Jews in the time of Jesus. Casual workers pledged their lands to pay debts, and their children were enslaved. According to the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verses 8 to 13, lands should be returned, debts should be cancelled, and slaves be freed in the year of Jubilee. It seems that the demand of Jubilee have never been implemented. Currently, Lutz takes the view of John Yodar that when Jews talked of debts and lands, they at the same time referred these to the hope of Jubilee. In the Jubilee, slaves were freed, debts were remitted, lands were returned, and foreigners were received. Both individuals and community could have a new beginning. The hope of Jubilee sustained the Jewish community and served as a base to demand a just society in which the poor could see their hopes. Today, the Church should try hard to follow Jesus, to make the year of the Lord's favor, as mentioned in Luke chapter 4, verses 16 to 21. That is, this promise should be fulfilled in Hong Kong. Therefore, all workers, including the ethnic minority groups, should no longer become economic slaves and to owe debts due to their responsibility to feed their families.